You are listening to the Cookbook Love podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 309.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. How's everybody doing today? As always, excited to be here today with an interview with Ben Tish. But before we get started, I do want to talk to you for just a second if you have recipes that you have collected or written that you want to publish in a book. Did you know that with just a few simple tools, you can format your book and publish it in about 3 months? This is exactly what I teach inside my course, Cookbooks on KDP, where I help food bloggers, cooks, bakers, and recipe collectors learn how to format and publish their recipes in a book using Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing platform. If you have recipes you're ready to publish and you want to get them in a book before Christmas, we are going to start our next cohort in early September. Head on over to www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/KDP to get on the wait list, and I will email you more information. So as I mentioned when we got started on the podcast today, I have an interview with Ben Tish. Ben is the chef director of Cubitt House, a hospitality group based in London, England, where he oversees the food offerings across a number of London's best pubs and eateries. With his undying love of Mediterranean food and history, Ben is passionate about recreating the flavors and dishes of his travels to the Mediterranean in his home, his cookbooks, and restaurants. He's the author of 5 cookbooks, and today we're here to talk about his newest book, Mediterra, Recipes from the Islands and Shores of the Mediterranean. Today was a lot of fun to talk to Ben about the Mediterranean basin, which includes 18 distinctive countries, and a discussion about some ingredients and cooking techniques that you might not expect from the Mediterranean. Ben also shares his philosophy about recipe development and ingredient procurement as he's working on his cookbooks, his writing routine when he's actively working on a cookbook project, and balancing that with his work life at Cubitt House. We also talk about unique flavors and recipes from different sections of the book, which is broken up into the northern and eastern and southern shores of the Mediterranean. And then there's also a section on 3 of the islands in the Mediterranean. So this is a great episode, not only talking about food, cooking, recipes, but then also Ben's writing routine and his philosophy about cookbooks and cookbook authors and what he thinks makes for cookbooks that are very useful for home cooks. So without further delay, let's dive into this interview with Ben Tish. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the Cookbook Love podcast.
Hi.
So excited that you're here and talking about your most recent book.
Yeah, very excited. Very excited. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. You're welcome. Before we dive into talking about the book, and why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am a chef by trade. I've been cooking probably for about 30 years. I am a food writer. That's my passion. But I also look after a group of gastropubs in London. We have 8 pubs. They're all kind of individual, beautiful, iconic London pub buildings, all very central, and they all have their own individuality on the menu. But yeah, I'm one of the directors.
Yeah. And this is not your first book, correct?
No, that's right. So it's my 5th book. So officially my 5th book. My first book, 2012, was called Saltyard Food and Wine, which was self-published. And we did that when I was part of that company. And then properly published, I had Grill Smoke Barbecue, I think in 2016, something like that, live fire outdoor cooking. Then Moorish, which focused on the Arabic influence on parts of the Mediterranean, I guess. Then Sicilia, which was about Sicily. And then this is my latest book, Mediterra, which focuses on all of the Mediterranean.
Yeah. And I mean, we're talking about all of it. And the chapters are actually the northern shore, the eastern shore, the southern shores, and then the islands, which is really a neat way to think about this because it is a body of water. And it made me wonder if any other cookbooks have been written this way.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I have to say, I've got my publisher, so Bloomsbury is my publisher, to kind of thank for this, because when I was looking at this project, this concept, it was still the Mediterranean, but it was going to be a smaller kind of a smaller amount of countries. And we talked about it, and it was like, well, that has been done before, where you've kind of got, a book about the Mediterranean, and it perhaps covers 10 countries, which are the ones that we probably know. I mean, I would say the only exception to that is like Claudia Rodin's Med book, which, she very authentic in that she covered the countries where she lived. So it did cover, kind of France and Italy and so on, but also Egypt where she lived. And that was good. But I kind of wanted, and then the conversation came about, we should try and do something quite different. Most of these places I have been to traveling or so on. And if not, I went to through the research process, but wanted to showcase the Mediterranean kind of as a whole and show countries that people perhaps don't, associate with the Mediterranean. Some of North Africa, perhaps. Certainly in the UK, the Mediterranean people, it's where they go on holiday. It's Spain, Italy, southern France, the kind of the ubiquitous, that you kind of hear about. But there's so much more to it. And, Croatia being one, Egypt, even Turkey, perhaps people don't associate that, that kind of touching the Mediterranean basin. So getting into it was a real project. And when the publisher agreed that with me, we kind of, he increased my workload double overnight. So there's a lot of recipes in this book. There's more recipes in this book than I've done before. There's 140, which is quite a lot.
Yeah.
And there's probably another volume there somewhere, because, you're just touching the sides. But it was a really interesting book to write.
Yeah. And I counted, I think, 18 different countries when I went through and looked at all, and the way you have it divided up, I, looked at it. And I would say within each country, there's probably 4 to 6 recipes for each particular country then.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And, trying to, touch on a dessert, or something sweet. And then, trying to give a range in each section that kind of makes, whether it's a small plate or a starter or, an antipasti going into something main. And also what I've tried to do as well is weave in, because whilst Mediterranean, it is sunshine food, but it's all year round, right? And so some of the dishes in here are more robust, let's say, which there's still Mediterranean dishes, perhaps dishes you'd have in the winter. It's still full of sunshine, but it more robust, slow cooked. The pork. There's a pork shoulder in there, I think, with hazelnuts and kind of whatever wintry greens and that kind of thing, and a chili in there. Dishes like that, which kind of are what you'd want to eat in the winter in the Mediterranean.
Yeah. And despite all that, 18 countries, 4 different main regions in your book, there are commonalities of the Mediterranean region.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what the commonalities are and what you think the common thread is that goes through these. And then I thought we might go I want you to talk about some of the things that people might not expect to be in a Mediterranean cookbook. So let's talk about the commonalities first.
Yeah, I think so. The commonalities, I think, first and foremost, are the geography of it all. Into first of all, that it's the body of water, which is the Mediterranean. Kind of influences it, and all the countries on the Mediterranean. There's a kind of a microclimate, if you like, of it's cool winters, it's hot summers. So and there's a kind of the sea. The wind, the sea breeze kind of, influences a lot of what's grown there, and, the kind of the animals that are kind of, essentially grown there, that kind of thing. So that's, I think the environment is one. I think in terms of ingredients, olive oil is probably something that kind of links it all around. Then you've got things like citrus, kind of winter, in the winter you have citrus. I think, there's spices, there's herbs. But for me, I think the main thing really that kind of links it all and is important is the it's the food culture, perhaps, where, food is, I suppose food is sacrosanct. When you're, eating in the Mediterranean, having spent time there, it doesn't matter what your budget is or what you're doing, or the people stop to, the meal or the meals of the day are the absolute that is the most important thing. And so, everything stops for that meal, and it doesn't matter what else is going on around. They're going to have it. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the Mediterranean, but I spent a long time working with a friend of mine in Italy, and we were opening a restaurant in Puglia, and and it was really busy. We were opening this restaurant. Opening restaurants really kind of stressful, and there's lots to do, but every day, and we had a deadline, and every day we'd stop for like 2 or 3 hours, and have this lunch with his family and have wine and sit down, and really kind of cherish this meal that was being prepared, and a lot of love had gone into the meal, and we were all involved in that. And back of part of me was like, what are we doing? We should be getting on with this, but and I think that typified for me what a kind of the food of the Mediterranean, like the food culture of the Mediterranean is, and that goes for not everywhere, but most of the places. And for me, that's the kind of thing that links it.
Yeah. So I know here in the U.S. it's not that way.
No, nor in the UK.
No. I mean, I raise a family, and I prioritize like cooking for them. And one of my sisters said to me once, couldn't you just like feed them cottage cheese? Do you really have to like stop and like cook and like eat with them? And I said, well, no, of course I don't have to, but I wanted to, and I did. And what about London? Is the same thing? I mean,
it's exactly the same thing. It's not just London; it's the UK. I mean, I think we're just not. That's not part of our culture. This is the point. My wife and I. I mean, I'm at home most nights now. I mean, I don't. I'm not at work in the evening, and we will always sit down and have something to eat, but it's always kind of quite, we do it, it's a lovely thing to do, but we do it quite quickly, and it's kind of like, we've made a point of saying, right, we're going to sit down, we're not going to sit in front of the TV and do it. We'll sit down and try and make it an occasion, but it's still always at the back of our mind that we've got something else to do or whatever, and that is just a kind of a functional thing perhaps that we're doing. But it genuinely is, in the Mediterranean, where that is the culture. Everything it genuinely stops for that, and they want it to stop for that. And it feeds into things like, well, if they're spending all this time about sitting down together and enjoying and essentially breaking bread, then what they are putting on the table, they're going to spend the time to do that. Whether they're cooking it, whether they're making sure that what they're eating is the absolute best it can be, in terms of budget or whatever, so they won't accept anything less than what is best. The vegetables, the meat, the fish, and everything is just so well kind of thought of. Is the point, and we can never achieve that. I don't think it's not something. It's not in our culture.
And something that you mentioned in the introduction was that the food isn't overcomplicated either. It's not. No. Right. It's actually sometimes for you, it was even a shift to think of maybe just putting 2 or 3 or 4 simple ingredients together on a plate and calling that done, rather than something that's, buttered and sauced and,
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, that was a turning point for me in my professional chefing career, where because it kind of goes hand in hand with my food writing and so on, but having been brought up in Michelin star kitchens and that kind of thing, where it's all about making things as elaborate as possible, and this kind of thing, and then ending up working in an Italian kitchen and in London, but they were all, everybody in the kitchen bar me were Italian, and it was a turning point for me, because I was surprised at the time about the simplicity of the food, and I think I say in the book, I was a bit nervous about it. I thought, was this kind of, it was a bit alien to me. But what was profound, I thought, was that when the chefs were talking about the food, and again, they used to sit down for an hour, that all these young, that was every day, no matter how busy we were. They all used to sit down and have a big lunch together before service and a glass of wine and chat and all this kind of thing. That game was completely alien to me. But I fell in love with that. And they were all talking about the food, with passion and, oh, wow, look at these tomatoes that have arrived, and, whatever it is, or look at this watermelon or, and, I'd never kind of seen that passion before about the simplest things. And then you look at it and taste it. Yeah, that's amazing. And you realize you don't need to mess around with these things. Simplicity is key. If the ingredient is right, who really wants to spend all this time over elaborating food if you've got this amazing produce? So that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think actually simplifying it even for home cooks, which this book does as well, makes cooking more approachable in a way that makes it easier, and it gets us away from things that are processed and simple things we can do in our kitchen.
Very much so.
I don't know, when you invest the time in doing that, you want to share it with people. You want to sit down and talk about it. And I think it all just kind of intuitively goes together. But like you mentioned, It is a different way of thinking for a lot of cooks. But maybe today we can convince them to do a few of these things that might really go a long way in changing not only the way they're cooking, but the way they're thinking about food preparation.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about what might be in this book that might surprise people, like something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, because we know that Mediterranean diet and food is kind of having a little bit of a moment, actually held up as a healthy way of eating.
Well, it is a healthy way. I mean, it is it is the true healthy diet. It's not a forced or created diet. It's a balanced diet using, olive oil is apparently the only superfood. According, if you listen, do you know a guy called Tim Spector?
No, I've heard. I listened to the Zoe Nutrition podcast.
Well, exactly. So he's incredibly knowledgeable, and he says, there isn't really any true superfoods. It used to be kind of blueberries or whatever, but he said if he did have to say one, it would be extra virgin olive oil. And so that is obviously the basis of the Mediterranean diet. But it's about eating seasonally. It's about eating a whole range of things, and moderating, but, lots of, more vegetables and fruit and fish, still eating meat and having a glass of wine, but not so much. Grains and pulses and things like that are great. And that is the Mediterranean diet. So if you're kind of following that, then you're on the right track.
Yeah.
But to go back to your your question about what's unusual in the book, I mean, I just happened to open on this, but I do think like the beef hari. I don't know if you saw that recipe in there. So that's a kind of a really interesting one. I mean, I think for me, that's kind of like it's North African, and so again, I think a lot of people are surprised that that any of North Africa was really kind of Mediterranean focused. Don't know if you were surprised at that, but the beef hari is a really interesting one, and it ticks the box in that it's a soup, but it's a really hearty, rich soup. So it's something that you would probably have. It's not necessarily a summer dish. It's incredibly wholesome, flavoursome, and really it's got chickpeas in there. Sometimes has lentils in there. This one has chickpeas in there, and it's really about that. And the meat is just an addition, really. If you have meat, you could put lamb in there as well, but you can put lots of different things in there. But for me, it's quite unusual. I think a lot of people don't associate that with the Mediterranean, although it's kind of quite colourful and so on, and quite vibrant. But it's one of my favorite dishes in the book, actually.
It kind of reminds me of, I think, of shakshukas that people serve a lot, like a rich tomatoey sauce, but because this served with eggs, but this also has the beef chuck.
It's got beef, exactly.
Spices, and then it says, like you said, the chickpeas. If you want to add the chickpeas, it looks like a beautiful dish, and I love the eggs that you put on top. Maybe some Greek yogurt.
I think I mean, you perhaps wouldn't associate that with the Mediterranean, but again, it's down to just having a good stock. I don't. It's a dish for all seasons, really. But it could be very good in the winter as well.
And that's from the Southern Shores, and you said Algeria. Now, on the page before that, a recipe that caught my attention was the spiced fried chicken with sultanas and pine nuts.
Yeah.
That, I mean, there's something about, we say raisins, pine nuts together, and then with this fried chicken dish, I bet that's really good.
Yeah, it's unusual. I mean, it's probably, again, it's an Algerian dish. And, I think one of the kind of the signatures of that area of the Mediterranean is the kind of the sweet and sour agridolt, and it's a kind of an Arabic flavor. Sweet and sour was kind of, I wouldn't say created by the Arabs, but they introduced that into cooking. I wrote about it in my book Moorish. It's quite interesting, and the raisins kind of bring that along, and you've got the citrus in there as well, which kind of adds so it's that sweet and sour. Well, this dish is lovely, and we kind of cook that a lot. It's a street foodie thing, so it's fried chicken at the end of the day, which seems that this fried chicken,
right?
It seems that it's fried. Everybody's got their own version of fried chicken, but this is nice. The raisins and the pine nuts and the citrus, the spicing in there as well. It just kind of really brings it. Sorry, sultanas, not raisins. It really kind of brings it alive. It's an unusual dish, but yeah, a real favourite. I like the mint. We put kind of mint, just kind of a scatter of mint on at the end, which just kind of livens it up as well. It's a good dish. Yeah, no, good choice, that one.
Yeah. So what about what is the food in the Mediterranean? We talk about street food, and we talk about food you might eat in someone's home, maybe food in a restaurant. Like, when you think about the recipes in this book, is it kind of a cross section of those places, or is it mostly food out of homes? And
well, it's a real mix of things. So yeah, I think there is some street foodie dishes in there. There's some dishes that are home dishes. There aren't any real kind of restaurant dishes in here per se. It's if I've tweaked around with a lot of the things. I do that. So that my way of approaching these books is, whilst I very much want them to be for the home cook, they are most definitely for the home cook, and I want to keep them simple. But some of the recipes that I encounter on my travels and research need to be, or I want to, rather, not need, they don't need to be anything, but for my books, there's a certain kind of level that I would want to kind of bring to it. I don't want to overcomplicate it, but I do want to kind of make it perhaps a little bit more modern, or perhaps a bit lighter, or do you know what I mean? Like a bit kind of elevate it in one way, shape, or form. So don't get me wrong, there are some authentic dishes in here, but other ones, like some of the more of the home cooks that I've encountered, or dish recipes that have been passed on to me, I've created them at home and then thought, right, okay, I'm going to kind of do this to it to make it a bit more kind of current, a bit more vibrant perhaps, or exciting. So, but yeah, there's a whole range of influences in here.
Yeah. So the Tunisian restaurant then was from the Southern Shore. What about the islands? Talk a little bit about the islands that you focus on, and Crete, Sicily, and Sardinia.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, I had to get Sicily in there again. I think, for such a relatively small area of the Mediterranean, I could probably write another 3 books about Sicily. It's probably my favorite. So anyway, I want to write about Sicily. And I don't know, I think the islands are, they're kind of, they're otherworldly, and they've got their own kind of, they're ultra, I guess, ultra seasonal, ultra they're kind of self-sufficient, more so than the mainlands, as you would expect. It's kind of common sense, and they've got their own kind of sub food cultures, and perhaps even more of a simplicity, and less, there's less meat, as you would expect, more fish. They're islands, so there's more fishing going on there. And things like you on an island, you really wouldn't get fish inland. You'd only get it on the coast, and also you wouldn't eat meat on the coast. You'd only eat it inland. And this kind of thing, it's very they're very kind of driven by the geography of it, but they're kind of, I just like the way that these islands are kind of the subtle differences between that and the mainlands. But yeah, I think there's some that and they're beautiful. I mean, Sicily, I don't know, have you ever been to Sicily?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting. And I think islands generally have a lot more history than the mainland because they've been invaded, perhaps
Yeah.
a lot
They're
over the
kind of
years.
like natural targets for
Natural targets, exactly that.
Right.
Sicily being a prime
Yeah.
example. All of them really. So there's more kind of complexity to the cuisines and the influence or the different influences. Yeah.
Yeah. The recipe that's in the Crete chapter, fried squid with preserved lemons. When I go to, we just actually went out to eat over the weekend and we got an order of calamari before dinner. And it breaded very much like the picture that's in this book. It was very light, very fresh. They had a few olives and then they had the fresh lemon with it and really good. And I guess it's kind of funny when you go to like an Italian restaurant in the US that I suppose that could be considered Italian, but I loved seeing it in the Crete section.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think it's a coastal, fried squids is fairly commonplace. Certainly, Greek. I think Greece and its islands do the best calamari in my humble opinion.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just they've got the best. They have the best squid, that they fish. So yeah.
Yep. So the other region then is the northern shores, and this has Spain and France and
all the ones we know.
All the ones we know, but there has to be something in here that might be surprising to people. Let's see. Maybe Slovenia and Croatia, like you mentioned, people might not typically think of those countries when they think of the northern shores of the Mediterranean.
No, absolutely. And, and I think, clearly there's due to their geography, there's a big influence of Italy going on in those cuisines. But, there's also a kind of there's also kind of a bit of an Eastern European kind of vibe running through it as well, could I say? And then you throw in this kind of the sunshine, if you like, and it's a real kind of melting pot, really. But yeah, I think the overarching vibe is Italian, but it's just kind of geared towards their location, and I think they use a lot more kind of woodland things and forage things. When you kind of go there, it's a lot of that kind of stuff. I mean, it's really interesting, and I mean, Croatia is really kind of a hot spot at the minute. I mean, I don't know the UK, but loads of people are kind of going there at the minute. It's such a beautiful, amazing place, and the food is incredible.
Would you be willing to talk about the recipe called burek, Burek? It's the first recipe in the Croatia chapter. It has honey roasted pumpkin, goat cheese, and mint. Tell us about what that is. And gosh, it looks really good. It looks like something you could almost round. It's made with phyllo dough. Looks like it's stuffed, and it looks lovely.
Yeah, it's essentially a pie.
Like a pie,
and that you would kind of serve, hot. Well, you serve it hot, but it's often kind of served at room temperature, or kind of like almost like picnicky kind of style. But yeah, it's basically a kind of a pie. We use, you put pumpkin or squash in it. Sometimes it has kind of courgettes in it. And yeah, I think the influence there is kind of it's a Middle Eastern thing, really. It's kind of that's where the origins of that have come from. Middle Eastern, kind of North African, and made with phyllo pastry. That's again, you've got the phyllo pastry. You've got the nuts in there, like pistachios and things like that, which reflect that North African kind of history of it. But yeah, it's a great one. But yeah, I think again, that's quite a surprising dish. Often you get it with kind of like meat in there as well, like shredded lamb, and kind of chicken in there as well.
Beautiful.
But yeah, it's great. It's lovely. Nice fresh salad on the side.
Yeah. So, I mean, and like you said, there's pork, there's beef, there's some chicken, obviously. There's a lot of vegetables, there's spices, there's olive oil, there's sweets. What about a sweet? Something that people might think about when they think about dessert. Is that typically part of what people would eat when they're having these meals and they're sitting down? I mean, is dessert served often?
Well, no, not often. No, I think desserts. I think if you talk about kind of the authentic route, then the desserts are probably more of a special occasion kind of thing. So I think a dessert. If desserts in these places, it's perhaps a sweet or fruit or something like that, but at the weekend or a special occasion or for a party or something like that, then kind of that's when the desserts are kind of rolled out, really.
Yeah.
But I think again, it depends. It depends. There's more of a dessert culture. So places like Italy, obviously Sicily, it's very sweet heavy. So sweets are incredibly commonplace. Unlike perhaps I don't know, Croatia, for example. Those two places are in contrast. Or some of the kind of the North African the sweets and things like that are kind of a common quite commonplace. It just kind of depends on the area, really. But a lot of the desserts in here, again, they've been kind of influenced by pastry shops that I've been to in these places, and then I've tried to put a kind of a Western like a UK kind of twist on it, so it becomes again more accessible. And I want people to cook these at home,
Yes.
So I think if you take perhaps a traditional something from North Africa, people are they're not going to do that at home. They're just not. Do you know what I mean? Because it's perhaps not as accessible, or it's quite laborious to make. So with the dessert, certainly, I've tried to kind of weave a home cooked kind of thread to it, make people want to do that. So yeah.
So you're working full time at Cubitt House. The 8 pubs in London. How do you balance and work in the cookbook writing and recipe testing with a job like working at Cubitt House? And I think a lot of people that want to write books, they're like, well, maybe I'm working full time. I don't know how I would work it out. So something about balance, or if there is such a thing.
Well, I think there's balance. There's, there's no getting away from it. There is work to do, right? So you can't kind of get away from that. If most writers, I would say, I know for a fact that I couldn't retire from my day job to write books. It wouldn't pay the mortgage, well, it would go some way, but not a lot. And that's just the nature of it, unless you get to somebody like Temotolenghi or Diana Henry or whatever. But so you kind of do have to do it. But in terms of how I prioritize writing, because one, I love it. I find it, actually, I'm one of these people, slightly annoyingly, when I get into a project, I find it quite therapeutic. And it's kind of a little bit of kind of mindfulness, and I kind of really go into it, and I won't let anything else do it. But I found a kind of a rhythm, I suppose, where I deliberately don't use my work resources for the initial stages of the book, i.e. the writing of it and the recipe testing, because then you start kind of getting into, I think, the realms of it not being an authentic home cookbook. And interestingly, and this is not to name drop, so I'm not like that, but I am, Temotolenghi, who actually wrote a nice thing on the book for me. He has always been a bit of a mentor for me on writing, and even for my very first Salt Yard book, I got chatting to him, and he gave me some advice. And he now, and I do, if I'm going to start a book project, I will do all the recipe testing at home, and I will go and buy locally, just like anybody would, rather than kind of, so I go to the local supermarket. Okay, I'm quite lucky. I live in East London. There's lots of kind of markets and things like that. But to be able to kind of buy just like any other jump, because that's a lot of it is, where do you get these things from? So anyway, I'm slightly going on an angle here, but that's how I set my stall out. So in terms of how I fit it in to my day, when I get the concept going, I get up early, so I'm quite an early bird. So I will perhaps get up at 5 a.m. and do maybe 2 or 3 hours writing when I'm at my most productive, or feel like I can do it. and that's when I do it. And then in terms of testing the dishes, so I'll do the writing, and how I write. What I do is I write the recipe and the method. I'm lucky because I'm a chef. I've got kind of a lot, I've got that experience, so I know kind of what works. But I will leave out the quantities of the dishes, so of the ingredients. So I'll know it needs sugar in. I'll know it needs eggs. So I'll do all that, and that's kind of the first part of it. And I can do all that in the morning. And then when it comes to exacting the recipes, I'll test those at home, like on a weeknight. So I'll think, right, okay. Or if it's something a bit more elaborate or needs a bit more time, then I'll do that at the weekend. And so I'm doing this throughout the week. And then what I'm doing is when I'm testing it out, I'm filling in the gaps of how many eggs that needs or how many grams of sugar that needs. And then off the back of that, I might cross a few things out on the method that actually didn't work, or really, who's going to do that at home? Let's do that. And so it's kind of a two-part process, or three-part process. There's the initial, write the recipes in the morning, right? These are the recipes I'm going to do. And that's already been done for the book proposal, because I don't know how it is in the US, but when you do a book proposal in the UK, you have to write quite a lot just for the proposal. You have to give them the overarching kind of overview of the book, every single recipe header that you're going to do, and then a bunch of recipes finished. So it's quite a lot. They get a lot already, and so I've got all that, and then things like essays, perhaps, that I'll do those ad hoc. So I might do half an hour. When I've got half an hour at work, I'll have a coffee, right? I'll get in to do a bit of that, or Sunday afternoon, couple of hours on it and do it like that. So there's kind of different ways I do it. But the writing in the morning for me is the key thing. And that's when I get the recipes down, like this is it, boom, boom, and then do the testing throughout the week and the weekend and fill in the gap.
Yeah. I think it's wonderful you say the morning, and not that it has to be the morning, but that you find a time when you are feeling the most fresh and creative, as opposed to trying to come home from work and do that writing part. Yeah. The cooking is probably easier for you in the evening than the writing part is in the evening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I know if I'm doing it, if I try and attempt it, because I'm lucky. I do get some time while I'm at work. I can make some time while I'm at work, but I'm always not fully focused, distracted by, there's multiple things going on, and, and I'm distracted. And to be productive with writing, you have to get in the zone. I found, you've got to have 2 or 3 hours, and that's it. And I think I can't do any more than that on a day, because then it becomes kind of quite stale, and I struggle with it. And, some people can write, for 6-7 hours. I can't. I just can't do that. No. So that's kind of how I found it. And I'm quite good. I don't. I'm used to working to deadlines, I guess, with my work, and fearful of deadlines almost. So I kind of make sure that I'm on it. I try to be on it. But everybody's different.
I think deadlines actually help. They help. I know they help me, and even self-imposed deadlines that I give myself. Like, say, if I'm going to propose a book and I need to get it out there, I say, okay, I want to have it done by, such and such a time. Yeah. It's just no question about it. I just need to do it. Right.
Yeah. I'm the same. Yeah. Self-imposed deadlines. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. And then when you are actually testing your recipes, or you're filling in those quantities, I'm assuming then you probably just prepare it and eat that for your dinner, or you?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
I tell cookbook writers that all the time. Just make it your supper. I mean, there's then you can send it to someone else if you want to at some point, if you want someone else to try it. But while you're in that development stage, you don't have to cook 2 meals. Just eat what you're cooking.
Exactly that. No, that's it. Because
and for that reason, write cookbooks that you like to eat the food, because it all fits.
Yeah. You want to test it, and if there's a lot, often we're making, I'll make a cake because I have to make a whole cake, and so that's quite a lot, particularly if you're trying to be healthy as well. At the same time, eating a whole cake doesn't matter if it's Mediterranean or not; it's not healthy.
Right.
So it might get taken to work, or my wife might take it to work, and that kind of thing. And then you get feedback. So it's all kind of part of the process, and then, also building, I think, I like to use Instagram for showing behind the scenes, so you're kind of building up a bit of excitement about the book, and that's the recipe testing part of it. And so it's a nice build up and so that's all part of it.
Yeah. I appreciate the fact that you do try to shop it in supermarkets or markets where cooks would shop, rather than having access to restaurant ingredients that people might not have, or quantities or different quality levels of food. I think that it makes books more approachable when we're shopping in places that our audience shops. So it's good to know that you have added that, because I think it's tempting as a restaurant chef, I would imagine, to say, well, I maybe wouldn't do that, but I think it keeps you more in touch with the people who are going to be using your book.
Well, exactly. And then you can also offer an alternative, whereas, you can be very specific about one thing that you want, but ultimately if it's, if you can't get blood oranges, for example, then it's this, these are, or whatever it is, but you offer an alternative, or and make a point of saying it's actually as good, even if you don't use blood orange. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So I think that's quite important. I think the only bit of it, so I am being honest, is that when it comes to the photography stage of the book, which is often the window for doing photography has got shorter and shorter, and so it's like, this book, I did it in 8 days photography. Wow. But that's a lot. That is a lot, and so and that's, I would have liked more photos in it, to be honest, but it's a lot of recipes, so it was not possible. But then I'll use my resources at work to help with that. So I get all my chefs to kind of help me get that ready. But that's only just a time frame. But the testing is the key thing.
Yeah, I think so too, because the photos are there to serve, to enhance the book, but you really want recipes that work in someone's home kitchen. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. So obviously you're good at planning concepts for cookbooks. This is your 5th. What's the high level like when you're thinking about a concept for a book? What do you go through? What are the iterations of that?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so obviously the overarching thing for me is Mediterranean, which is very broad, so it would only ever be that. But that's what I'm kind of have become known for, is that side of food and writing about it. And then I guess it's about trying to come up with something that is one that I feel naturally like I can kind of. It's not an awkward. It's got to be. It's got to feel authentic to me that I can do it, and trying to cover something that's perhaps not been done, or part of it's not been done before. I mean, there's been loads written about the Mediterranean, right? Over the years, and it's not an untouched subject. There's lots. So to explore, different things in the Mediterranean and make it interesting, but also kind of current and relevant. A lot of the Mediterranean books, there's some great ones out there, but a lot of them are kind of just cover the old stuff, and it's always got to be, for me, it's always got to be kind of different and interesting and current. I've got my next book, which I've kind of got planned out, will go back to being more specific. Obviously Mediterranean specific, but a bit more kind of honed down. And I want to cover kind of the Mezzogiorno, so basically the southern Italy from Basilico downwards, and kind of get into that a bit more, because there's a lot to be done. That, and there's been a couple of things around that, but I don't know, in my style, and which is given my slant, that area through my lens, basically.
So it sounds like book writing is kind of part of your life.
No, I mean, very much so. I love it, and I do love it, and I do want to, I want to do more. I think it was something I would like to do for the next 10 years or whatever. I mean, Cubitt House is fantastic. I love it, but I'm not going to be doing that forever. That's a business that, it's a lot of work, and, but to be able to kind of like slowly retire into something where, it's writing and travel, a travel log, or perhaps, this kind of thing. I'd like to be doing it for the next 10 years. And I've definitely got ideas for books. But you're only as good as your last book, right? And so, it's not, it will all come to how this book sells. And, even though I've got a very good relationship with the publisher, but it's all about sales.
Yeah. So I hope that everyone who's listening will check out Mediterra.
Absolutely.
Because that's, I think discovering new books and maybe authors that people haven't been introduced yet to, different styles of writing and cooking. There's certainly a ton of recipes. And I think this also, a lot of our listeners read cookbooks. They cook from them, but they read them as well. And I think this one lends itself to some really good reading.
I hope so.
From cover to cover, from what I can see from looking through it, and nice meaty head notes, discussions about different ingredients. So it's a great read, a beautiful read as well. So
thank you. That's appreciated.
So as we're wrapping up and talking about cookbooks, I know that there's probably cookbooks that have influenced your work either at home or in your writing or in your restaurant. So what's on your shelf in terms of a cookbook or two that really have influenced the work that you do?
Okay, so this is quite interesting. It's very fortuitous, actually, but I'm a huge fan of Diana Henry's writing, and have been for many years. And one of her books, I'd say it's probably one of my favorites, is Crazy Water Pickled Lemon, which I believe it came out in 2002. And so I've got a very, very well thumbed version of that on my shelf. And, I was reading it, and this is not connected to this. I was reading it over the weekend because she's just released it. There's a new release of it has just come out. I think a lot of her books are being re-released with a kind of just slightly reviewed and fresh covers and things like that. And I got sent a copy of the new one, so I was reading through it, and I just thought how that had influenced my cuisine, and it's still as fresh as ever. It covers a lot of this. It's kind of Mediterra in lots of ways. It covers the Eastern Mediterranean and all these things. Before it was kind of, I guess, fashionable, or it was kind of very well talked about. And there's some amazing recipes in there, and none of them are, I would say, are out of place. The book hasn't aged over 20 years, or whatever it is, 22 years. Hence it's being re-released, and she was so on the money with that book. And I think, for me, it kind of influenced me more than the people that I was perhaps working for at the time, or, chefs, and she sent me the book, and I messaged her, and she said, I was so pleased. I said, that book helped shape my food philosophy. And, again, as well as working at El Duco and all these kind of things, but, simplicity, vibrant, big flavors, spices, it covers it all in there. And, I look in my old copy, it's so well used and splattered, and which is the sign of a good cookbook, right? So I would have to say there's now 2 copies of that sat on my shelf. One is the new version, one is the old version. And they're both, there's a couple of new recipes in the new one, but there didn't need to be. So I'd say that's my my favorite book. There is one other that, if I've got time to mention it,
sure.
Morrow. So Sam Clark Morrow, and again, they, groundbreaking restaurants. When I was first making a name for myself with Salt Yard, I used to go to eat at Morrow, Xmas Market. Again, Morrow's kind of like more, it's Moorish cuisine, really. It's kind of, it focuses on Spain, but with the North African kind of Andalusian Moorish kind of vibe running through it. So it's Spain, it's also North Africa. And their book, they've done a few books, but the original Morrow was an absolute Bible for me when I was at Saltyard in terms of learning about ingredients of that regions and the cuisine. And it's still a book that I refer to when I'm writing recipes for or writing menus. Actually, for some of my other pubs and things like that, I refer to that. It's again, for me, it's books that are still fresh after 20 years or 18 years. I think that's if I have a book, if one of my books is still relevant in 15 years time, I'll be very happy.
Yeah, I always think that's amazing when books stay in print and people are still buying them and they're talking about them and using them. And both of those sound great. So I will link to those also in the show notes. And I think that it helps people to get to know you a little better and the kinds of things that you like to cook. And then also, obviously, the books that you like to write. So it's always a pleasure to hear about those as well.
Great.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I would like you to tell everyone how they can connect with you online.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best way is probably on Instagram. So my Instagram is ben.tish, and kind of everything that I'm up to is on there. I kind of post daily, whether it's a little bit of personal stuff, but more professional stuff. But also you can have a look at Cubitt House website, which is the pubs and the food that we do. If anybody's ever in London, then come and
yes.
I'm sure this podcast is listened to.
It's listened to all over the world, and I had people. So if anybody is, I told Ben before we started recording that I was like looking at the menus of the pubs, and I'm like, oh my gosh, well, next time I'm in London, I gotta go.
Yeah. Well, you must do, please do. But Instagram's probably the shop front, if you like.
Yeah, great. And one of the pubs does have a Mediterranean. You told me an influence in terms of the food that you prepare there.
Yeah,
two of them.
Two of them. Yeah. So the Princess Royal, which is in Notting Hill, where we have a beautiful kind of Mediterranean terrace and rosemary and olive trees and things.
Yes.
And also a pub called the Orange, which is in Belgravia.
Okay.
Which again, we have wood-fired ovens, so we're kind of doing lots of stuff from there, but it's Mediterranean.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and I wish you the best of luck with your book, Mediterra.
Thank you very much.
And I look forward to the next one, and maybe we can connect again talking about cookbooks.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.